I shouldn't be telling you this. Every fiber of my being screams at me to keep it locked away, deep inside, where the shadows can't reach. But the truth is, the shadows are already here. They're under my bed, in the corners of my room, swirling in my peripheral vision. They've been here ever since. Well, ever since I started following the rules. The 8 rules for exploring abandoned places. My hands are shaking. You can probably hear it in my voice. They've been shaking for weeks, ever since the last time, ever since rule number 8. I haven't slept properly in months. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind outside sends a jolt of ice through my spine. Because I know it's still out there. It followed me home, and it's waiting for me to slip up again, to forget one of the rules. Or maybe it's just waiting for me to be alone enough, vulnerable enough for it to finish what it started. So, I'm telling you this, not for therapy, not for absolution, but as a warning, a desperate, raw, unfiltered warning. Because maybe, just maybe, if I scream it into the void, if I make you understand, then you won't make my mistakes. You won't go looking for the forgotten. You won't invite the things in. And if you're already out there, if you're already dabbling, then maybe these rules will save you. Or maybe, like me, they'll just show you how truly, terrifyingly alone you are. This isn't just a story, it's a confession and a desperate plea. Please just listen, for your own sake, and maybe for mine. It started innocently enough, as these things always do, don't they? A curious itch, a desire to peel back the layers of time, to witness the quiet decay of forgotten grandeur. Most people, they romanticize urban exploration, right? Crumbling grandeur, forgotten stories, the thrill of discovery. It started that way for me too. A rush, an escape from the suffocating predictability of my own life, the gray walls of my apartment, the drone of city traffic. I craved the silence, the dust motes dancing in shafts of light filtering through broken windows, the phantom whispers of lives once lived within those peeling walls. I loved the smell, a potent cocktail of damp earth, mildew, rust, and the faint, sweet decay of old wood. It was a sensory assault, a morbid beauty that called to something wild and untamed deep inside me. My first few excursions were exhilarating. An old, abandoned factory, its colossal machinery now skeletal, draped in rust and cobwebs. A derelict asylum, chilling even in the midday sun, but still just an empty building. A ghost town swallowed by the encroaching desert, its buildings sun-bleached and brittle. There was always that thrill, that prickle of apprehension, but it was a manageable fear, a playful dance with the unknown. I meticulously researched my locations, always checking for structural integrity, for active security, for signs of people. But the more places I saw, the deeper I delved, the more I craved. The thrill became a hunger, the rush an addiction. I started venturing further, into places with darker reputations, places whispered about in hushed tones online, places with stories. And that's when the subtle shifts began. It wasn't a sudden, jarring event. It was insidious, like a slow creeping mold, a shadow that lingered a fraction too long in my peripheral vision, a cold spot that made the hairs on my arms prickle, even in a stifling summer afternoon, the distinct scent of something rotten, not like decay, but like something else, something wrong. In an abandoned orphanage, I heard a child sob, faint but undeniably clear, echoing from an empty, dust-choked dormitory. I rationalized it. Old pipes, wind, my imagination fueled by the oppressive atmosphere. But the sound had been too real, too heartbroken. And then there was the doll, a porcelain doll, pristine and unsettlingly clean, sitting upright on a broken crib in the very center of the room where I'd heard the sound. I swore it hadn't been there when I first entered. My blood ran cold. I fled. That was the first time I felt it. A tendril of genuine, unshakable dread curling in my gut. It wasn't the fear of getting caught or of falling through a rotten floorboard. It was the fear of something else, something unseen. I tried to dismiss it, but the incidents accumulated. A faint, almost imperceptible hum that vibrated through the floorboards of an old manor, growing louder when I stood in the main hall. The feeling of being watched, not by a person, but by something vast and ancient. The way the air would suddenly thicken, grow heavy, making it hard to breathe, like stepping into a cold, wet blanket woven from dread. I started coming home feeling unclean. A residue clung to me, a feeling of desolation that seeped into my skin, into my dreams. The dreams became vivid, grotesque tapestries of the places I'd visited, distorted and populated by shadows that moved with unnerving intelligence. It was after my visit to the old, flood-damaged church, a place so ancient and waterlogged, it felt like it had been salvaged from the bottom of the ocean, that the rules started to form, or rather, that I discovered them. Not written on ancient scrolls, not whispered by spectral figures. No, they were etched into the very fabric of my experiences, forced upon me by a desperate instinct for self-preservation. I almost didn't make it out of that church. The water, stagnant and dark, had reached my shins, and something in it had pulsed, a low thrum like a heartbeat that resonated through the soles of my feet. And then the whispering began, not in my ears, but inside my skull, a chorus of voiceless pleas and guttural snarls that threatened to rip my sanity apart. I felt hands, cold and slick, brush against my ankles beneath the murky water. I scrambled out, soaking wet, shivering uncontrollably, my mind screaming with a primal terror I hadn't known existed. I didn't stop running until I was back in my car, peeling away, the rearview mirror showing only the dark, silent silhouette of the church against the bruised twilight sky. But even then, I could still feel the phantom touch, the whispers echoing in the confines of my mind. That night, lying awake, bathed in sweat, staring at the ceiling, I realized my casual hobby had become something else. A dangerous game played on ground I didn't understand, with rules I didn't know. And the stakes were no longer just my physical safety, but my very soul, my sanity, my life. I needed a framework, a set of principles, something to cling to guide me, to protect me. I began meticulously documenting every strange occurrence, every unsettling feeling, every near miss. And slowly, agonizingly, the rules emerged. Not a choice, a necessity, a desperate plea for order in a world that had become irrevocably chaotic and terrifying. They weren't just guidelines for urban exploration. They were a survival manual for confronting the things that dwell in the forgotten spaces. I learned them through trial and error, through close calls, through the chilling realization that some things, once disturbed, can never truly be put back. Each rule, each principle came from an experience that pushed me closer to the edge, that left me profoundly, irrevocably changed. A little piece of me died in each of those places, leaving behind a husk filled with dread and a desperate need to warn others. I know what you're thinking. Stop going. just stop. Believe me, I've tried. But it's like a curse now, an obligation. The rules aren't just for my safety anymore. They're a pact, a responsibility. And breaking the pact, ignoring the call, feels even more dangerous than answering it. Like something would come looking for me if I stopped. Something that remembers, something that resents. So, here I am. My voice trembling, my eyes darting, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. I'm going to tell you about the rules, each one a scar on my soul, a testament to what I've seen, what I've felt, and what it felt like to be hunted. And I'm going to tell you the story behind each one, the incident that forged it, the price I paid to learn it. I need you to understand, truly understand, because some things, once awakened, once disturbed, they don't go back to sleep. They linger, they wait. And if you're not careful, they will find you. All right, let's start with rule number 1, the foundation, the one that seemed so innocuous, so logical, until it wasn't. Rule number 1, always enter through the most obvious opening. Sounds simple, right? Like common sense. You find a broken window, a gaping hole in a wall, a door hanging ajar. That's your way in. No crawling through tiny vents, no shimmying down forgotten cellar hatches. Just the straightforward path. I thought it was about safety, about avoiding collapsed sections or hidden dangers, but I was wrong. It was about invitation. I learned this rule the hard way, in a place I still see when I close my eyes, the Blackwood Sanatorium. It wasn't just abandoned, it felt cursed. Tucked deep within a forgotten forest, the trees grew so dense around it that the air inside was perpetually dim, even at noon, smelling of wet earth, rotting leaves, and something vaguely medicinal, a cloying sweetness that made my stomach churn. Most urbex forms warned against it, whispered about the patients who'd vanished, the staff who'd gone mad. Of course, that only made me want to go more. Addict, remember? The main gates were rusted shut, wrapped in chains, but there was a section of the stone wall that had crumbled, creating an easy-to-spot breach, the obvious opening. I stood there, backpack slung over my shoulder, the sun barely filtering through the canopy, casting eerie, shifting patterns on the forest floor. A prickle of unease ran down my spine. The air felt heavy, damp, almost alive. But the thrill, that familiar, seductive pull, was stronger. Except, for some reason that day, I didn't use it. I don't know why. Maybe it was hubris. Maybe I thought I was too good for the easy way in. Maybe I wanted a challenge. I saw a small, rusted iron service door, half obscured by overgrown ivy, around the side of the building. It was tight, practically flush with the ground, but it looked less exposed, less like an open maw. A whisper in my mind told me, this is more authentic, more secret. A stupid, fatal whisper. I wrestled with the door, the rusted hinges shrieking like tormented souls. The metal scraped against the stone, a sound that echoed through the oppressive silence of the woods. Finally, with a grunt, I forced it open just enough to squeeze through, scraping my shoulder. The air inside hit me like a physical blow. Cold, damp, and thick with the scent of stagnant water and something metallic, like old blood. I stood in a cramped, dark service tunnel, the faint light from the crack in the door barely illuminating the cracked concrete walls. My flashlight beam cut through the inky blackness, revealing glistening patches of mold and spider webs thick enough to catch small birds. As I moved deeper, the tunnel sloped downwards, and the air grew colder, wetter. Water dripped from the ceiling, echoing loudly in the oppressive silence. I felt a growing sense of claustrophobia, a tightening in my chest. My breath hitched. This was not the vast, decaying grandeur I sought. This was a dark, forgotten gut. Then I heard it. A low, rhythmic thump, 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 thump. Faint at first, but growing steadily louder. It vibrated through the concrete floor, up into my boots, into my bones. My heart began to pound in response, mimicking the strange rhythm. I froze, flashlight beam fixed on the darkness ahead. My mind screamed at me, "Turn back, get out." But I pushed forward. Addiction, remember? The tunnel opened into a large cavernous space, a forgotten sub-basement. The thump-thump was deafening now, reverberating off the curved, damp walls. It was coming from a central point, a large, dark mass. As my flashlight beam finally reached it, my blood ran cold. It wasn't machinery, it was a mound, a grotesque, pulsating mound of what looked like discarded medical supplies, old uniforms, rusty instruments, bed springs, and something else, something dark and organic. And from the center of it, a thick, pulsating vein, like an enormous umbilical cord, snaked up into a gaping hole in the ceiling above. The thump-thump was the sound of this thing, this living, breathing mass drawing something, feeding on something from the floors above. The entire space hummed with a low, predatory energy that made my teeth ache. A sweet, sickly odor filled the air like rotten fruit mixed with formaldehyde. My stomach churned violently. I saw movement within the mound, a subtle shifting, as if it were constantly rearranging its grotesque components. And then I saw the eyes. Not human eyes. Too large, too black, glinting wetly from various points within the pulsating mass, opening and closing with unnerving regularity. They were all fixed on me. Hundreds of them. My mind splintered. I stumbled backward, a strangled gasp catching in my throat. The thumping intensified, growing frantic. The air grew impossibly heavy, crushing. I could hear whispers, not in my head this time, but emanating from the mound itself, a sibilant chorus of unintelligible sounds that felt like a drill boring into my eardrums. I was in a place not meant for living things. I had not been invited. I had intruded. I turned and scrambled back into the tunnel, my lungs burning, the thump-thump and the whispers chasing me. My hands were slick with sweat and something else, something I didn't want to think about. I didn't look back, not once. I didn't stop running until I burst back out into the dim forest light. Gasping, my body trembling uncontrollably, I could still hear the thumping, a faint echo in my skull, and the lingering scent of that sickly sweetness clung to my clothes, to my hair. That's when I understood. The obvious opening is not just a path of least resistance, it's the path of least resistance for a reason. It's what the place allows. It's the door left ajar, the broken pane of glass that says, you can come in if you must. But the hidden entrances, the ones you have to force, to pry open, to sneak through, those are for the things that don't want to be found, or for the ones that don't want you to be found. When you bypass the obvious, you don't just enter a building, you break a barrier. You trespass in a way that truly awakens something that might have been content to merely exist. But now, because of your forced intrusion, is very, very aware of you. And so, rule number 1 was etched into my soul. Always enter through the most obvious opening. Never force a hidden way in, because the things that reside there, they remember. They know you bypass their preferred path, and they will make you regret it. every single time. This led me directly to rule number 2, a rule born from another terrifying encounter, a lingering phantom touch that still makes my skin crawl. Rule number 2, never touch anything that isn't dust. This one might seem even more straightforward. Don't disturb artifacts, don't vandalize, don't leave fingerprints. Respect the history. Again, I thought it was about preservation, but I was naive. It was about transference, about asterisk connection. The incident that solidified this rule occurred in an old, abandoned doll factory. Not just a place that used to make dolls, but one that had been abruptly shut down mid-production. It felt charged, like a still beating heart ripped from a chest. Thousands of doll parts lay scattered everywhere, disembodied heads with vacant painted eyes, limbs piled in grotesque heaps, glass eyes staring up from grimy floors like scattered gems. The air was thick with the faint, sweet scent of old plastic and something else, something cold and metallic, like static electricity before a storm. I was being careful, as I always tried to be. My gloves were on, my backpack secured. I moved slowly through the main assembly hall, the silence punctuated only by the occasional scuttle of a rat or the drip of water. The light was dim, filtering through grimy skylights, casting long, distorted shadows that seemed to writhe and stretch with every shift of my weight. The raw, unfinished faces of the dolls, some still on the assembly line, were unsettling, their expressions frozen in blank, expectant stares. I noticed a small, intricately carved wooden marionette hanging from a single, frayed string, swaying gently in the otherwise still air in a dark corner. It was unique, distinct from the plastic dolls. Its paint was faded, its joints stiff, but it had an undeniable, almost hypnotic presence. Its small, carved face, with its slightly upturned nose and delicate painted smile, seemed to beckon me. It was too perfect, too out of place. My rational mind screamed at me, "Don't. Leave it alone." But it was too beautiful, too compelling. It wasn't dust. It was art, and it was swaying. There was no breeze, no open window. It was swaying on its own. A whisper, seductive and curious, urged me closer. Just a touch. See how it's made. I reached out, my gloved hand hovering, then against every rising instinct, I gently brushed my fingers against its faded wooden leg. The moment my glove made contact, a jolt, not of electricity, but of pure, profound cold, shot up my arm, seizing my hand. It was like plunging my hand into ice water, but it went deeper, to the bone, a cold that radiated inward, chilling my very marrow. And then I felt it, not just a sensation, a presence. It was as if something transferred from the marionette into me, a sudden, overwhelming sense of loss, a profound, crushing sorrow, so intense it almost buckled my knees. It wasn't my sorrow. It was its sorrow, and it was mixed with a simmering, quiet rage. I felt phantom strings pull at my own limbs, a fleeting sensation of being controlled, of my own body not quite being my own. My breathing hitched, my vision blurred. I snatched my hand back as if burned, stumbling away from the marionette. The cold still lingered in my hand, a gnawing ache, and the feeling of overwhelming sadness clung to me, thick and suffocating. The marionette, released from my touch, stopped swaying. It just hung there, lifeless, its painted smile now seeming mocking, triumphant. As I retreated, my eyes fixed on the doll, I heard a faint, high-pitched giggle. It wasn't the sound of a child. It was brittle, dry, like crumbling paper, and it seemed to come from all around me, echoing off the stacks of doll parts. Then, one by one, the blank doll heads on the assembly line, those thousands of vacant eyes, began to turn, slowly, deliberately, following me as I backed away. Their unblinking stares pierced me, filled with an inexplicable malice. I fled the factory in a blind panic, the brittle giggling pursuing me, the phantom ache of sorrow and rage clutching at my heart. It took me days to shake the feeling of being watched, of something having latched onto me. My hand remained cold, persistently cold, for weeks. And for months afterward, I would occasionally feel a strange, twitching sensation in my limbs, as if unseen strings were attempting to tug me, to direct my movements. It was a terrifying reminder that the connection once made was not easily severed. Rule number 2 became absolute. Never touch anything that isn't dust. Because these places aren't just empty. They are vessels, containers. The objects within them aren't just relics. They're anchors. And when you touch them, you risk pulling something out, or worse, letting something in. A memory, an emotion, a presence. Something that was left behind, waiting for a connection, a way out. And you become that connection. You become the way out. It's not about vandalism. It's about not becoming the next host, not becoming the next puppet. It's about not letting the sorrow, the rage, the things that lingered find a new home in you. Because once they do, they leave their mark, a permanent, chilling imprint. And sometimes they don't ever truly leave. They just quiet down, waiting for another opportunity, waiting for you to forget. Rule number 3. This one hit me hard, right in the ears, right in the gut. Because sometimes the scariest thing isn't what you hear, it's what you don't. Rule number 3. Never trust the silence. You go into an abandoned place and you expect silence, right? The eerie quiet of a forgotten space. But it's never truly silent. There's always the groan of old wood, the whisper of wind through broken glass, the scuttle of unseen creatures, a living silence, a breathing silence. What I learned, the hard, soul-shattering way, is that sometimes there's another kind of silence, a dead silence, an unnatural, suffocating quiet that means something truly, profoundly wrong is happening. This rule was forged in the ruins of what was once a grand old concert hall, the Majestic. It had burned decades ago, leaving behind a skeletal structure of charred beams and blackened stone. But the main auditorium, surprisingly, was still largely intact, albeit roofless, open to the sky. I'd seen photos online, the vast space with its ruined stage, the rows of collapsed seats, all under a canopy of stars. It called to me, a morbid beauty. I went on a clear, crisp night. The moon was almost full, casting long, stark shadows. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of damp earth and burnt wood. As I approached, the usual sounds of the forest, the rustle of leaves, the chirping of crickets, the distant hoot of an owl, faded, not gradually, abruptly. It was like stepping into a sound vacuum. The silence wasn't just the absence of sound. It was an active presence, pressing in on my eardrums, making them ache. It felt heavy, suffocating, like a thick velvet curtain had dropped around me, absorbing every vibration. My own footsteps, usually loud enough to echo in such a space, were strangely muffled. Even my breathing seemed swallowed up. I stood at the back of the auditorium, my flashlight beam cutting a path through the gloom. Moonlight spilled onto the ruined stage, highlighting a lone, overturned grand piano, its keys a mangled grin. The silence was absolute. More terrifying than any scream, I could hear the blood rushing in my own ears, a frantic drum against the oppressive void, then a flicker, a disturbance in the profound quiet. Not a sound, not really. More like a ripple in the air. Just beyond the stage, where the orchestra pit would have been, a deeper shadow seemed to coalesce, a patch of black that swallowed even the pale moonlight. And from it, a feeling emanated, a cold, hungry attention. My heart hammered, my mouth was dry. I wanted to run, but my feet felt rooted to the concrete. The silence intensified, becoming a roar in my head. I stared at that deeper shadow, my flashlight beam wavering. It seemed to expand, to breathe, and still, no sound, no creak, no whisper, no rustle. Just that crushing, impossible quiet. Then the phantom music began, not heard with my ears, but felt inside my head. A discordant symphony of strings and brass, swelling and decaying, rising and falling in an impossible, silent crescendo. It wasn't just music, it was the echo of suffering, of a performance that had gone horribly, terminally wrong. It was a cacophony of agony, played without sound, pressing directly into my mind. I clamped my hands over my ears, desperate to block it out, but it was inside me, a direct feed. I stumbled backwards, gasping, my head swimming. The silence in the auditorium remained unbroken, but the silent symphony in my skull grew louder, more frantic, driving me to the brink of madness. I could feel tears streaming down my face, hot and stinging. The deep shadow on the stage pulsed, a silent, ravenous maw. I realized then that the silence wasn't protective. It was a lure, a trap. It was designed to isolate me, to cut me off from the world, to make me vulnerable to what could only manifest in that utter lack of sound, to make me listen only to it. I broke free of the paralysis, stumbling blindly through the wreckage of the seats, not caring where I stepped, only desperate to escape that crushing, silent presence. I didn't stop running until I burst out of the concert hall's grounds, gasping for air, the normal sounds of the forest crashing back in, a sudden, jarring relief. The silent symphony in my head slowly faded, leaving behind only a throbbing headache and a profound, bone-deep terror. From that night on, rule number 3 was carved into my very being: never trust the silence. If a place is unnaturally, profoundly silent, if all ambient sounds are swallowed, if even your own breath feels muted, get out immediately. That kind of silence isn't peaceful. It's a predator. It's what they create to isolate you, to make you vulnerable, to fill your mind with what they want you to hear. It means you've stepped into their domain, and they've just shut the door. This chilling encounter fed directly into the next rule, one born from a profound sense of psychological unmooring. Rule number 4, always carry a piece of the outside world. This isn't about practical tools like a multi-tool or a first aid kit. It's about a specific object, something small, personal, and utterly mundane. Something from your life, from the real world. I chose a simple, smooth river stone I'd picked up years ago on a family trip, worn smooth by countless currents. I keep it in my pocket, always. At first I thought it was just a silly superstition, a comfort object, but it became my anchor, my tether to sanity. The place that taught me this rule was an old, dilapidated clock tower. Not just any clock tower, but one rumored to be off the grid, somehow existing outside normal time. A ludicrous idea, I know, but it was remote, nestled in a valley that seemed to defy GPS signals, shrouded in perpetual mist. I went in broad daylight, thinking the sun would keep any strangeness at bay. I was wrong. The air inside was thick, cold, and smelled of ozone and ancient oil. Gears the size of car wheels filled the lower levels, coated in thick dust, frozen mid-motion. The grinding, whirring symphony of its former life was now just a silent, petrified memory. Light filtered through stained glass windows, casting fractured, colored patterns on the dust-laden floor. It was beautiful in a disquieting way. I climbed the winding metal staircase, the sound of my boots clanking, echoing eerily, higher and higher, past vast, silent cogs and pendulums that stood still like dormant monsters. As I ascended, a strange disorientation began to set in. My sense of direction faltered. I'd passed the same landing, or so it seemed, multiple times. The light outside the windows, which should have been steadily bright, seemed to shift, growing dimmer, then brighter, then a strange twilight hue, all within minutes. It was like time itself was flickering, stuttering around me. A dizzying nausea coiled in my stomach. My thoughts felt loose, disconnected. I found myself staring at a dust motes, dancing in a sunbeam, unable to remember what I was doing, why I was there. A creeping panic began to set in. My memory felt patchy, like a film with missing reels. What was my name? Where was my home? The answers felt slippery, just out of reach. The clock tower wasn't just old. It felt like it was eating time, eating identity. I reached the top level, the bell chamber. Massive bells, verdigrised and silent, hung like colossal, sleeping giants. But the disorientation was overwhelming here. The windows showed a landscape that looked subtly wrong, not quite the valley I'd entered. The mist outside swirled with impossible speed, and then, for a split second, it cleared, revealing a landscape that was utterly alien. Jagged, dark mountains, a sky a bruised purple. Then it was gone, replaced by the familiar valley, though still shrouded in its unnatural mist. I was losing it. My grip on reality was fraying like old rope. My hands flew to my pockets, searching frantically. My heart pounded. What was I looking for? I didn't know. Just something. Anything. My fingers closed around the smooth, cool river stone. The moment I felt its familiar weight, its cool, smooth surface against my skin, it was like a jolt. A sudden sharp clarity cut through the swirling fog in my mind. The nausea subsided. The frantic, disconnected thoughts snapped back into place. I remembered my name, my purpose. The valley outside the window, though still misty, settled into its familiar, if eerie, shape. The world, my world, coalesced around the stone. It was my anchor, my constant, my proof that I was still me, still here, still tethered to a recognizable reality. I clutched the stone, my knuckles white, and stumbled back down the stairs, not daring to look back at the alien landscape that had almost claimed me. The disorientation attempted to creep back in, but each time I squeezed the stone, focusing on its coolness, its weight, its undeniable reality. It was a struggle, a fight for my own mind, but the stone held me. I emerged from the clock tower gasping into the still misty daylight, profoundly shaken. I felt as if I'd been gone for days, weeks even, yet my phone showed only an hour had passed. The experience was a horrifying lesson in psychological vulnerability. And so, rule number 4 became a sacred ritual. Always carry a piece of the outside world. It's not about comfort. It's about fighting the subtle, insidious ways these places try to unmoor you, to make you forget who you are, to make you lose your way, not just physically, but mentally. When the boundaries blur, when time stretches and reality frays, That small, mundane object from your world becomes your lifeline, your proof, your identity. Without it, you might step out of that place, but you might not step back into yourself. And that, I learned, is a fate far worse than any physical harm, because what's left of you then, just an empty vessel, waiting to be filled with whatever these places leave behind. So, there they are, 4 of the 8 rules, 4 terrifying lessons burned into my very soul. Believe me, the others, Rule 5, about the static, Rule 6, about the mirrors, Rule 7, the scent of something sweet, and especially Rule 8, the one that broke me, the one that followed me home. They're even worse. Each one a desperate barrier against the things that wait, things that crave, things that remember. I've told you my story, raw and unvarnished, not for sympathy, but because I need you to understand the true cost of curiosity. Don't go looking for the forgotten. Don't invite the darkness in. If you've heard similar whispers, felt that unnatural cold, or have your own strange rules for the unknown, share them below. Maybe, just maybe, by sharing our fears, we can build a fragile shield. Thank you for listening. Your presence, even just through this screen, is a tiny flicker against the overwhelming shadow. And if you're out there now, remember these words, because they're not just rules, they're prayers.